Back in 2020, the first reports started surfacing from credible sources that Amazon Studios, in partnership with Sony Pictures, was planning to develop a full-fledged live-action series based on God of War. These early rumors quickly gained traction, and the fans split into two camps. Some were genuinely excited, believing that an adaptation on this scale could take the franchise to the next level. But others saw it as just another attempt by Amazon to cash in on a popular IP without truly understanding the source material, and feared the result would be another mediocre product. To understand the reaction at the time, you've got to remember the context. In 2020, video game adaptations were still looked at with a lot of skepticism. Neither The Last of Us nor the Super Mario movie had come out yet, which means the genre hadn't proven itself either critically or commercially. People still remembered the disappointment of Warcraft, a film that had major backing from Universal and Legendary, and was hyped up as the beginning of a sprawling cinematic trilogy, complete with an extended universe and spin-offs. But in the end, it barely made its money back. Even though some fans appreciated the visual style and still ask for a sequel to this day, Warcraft ultimately stood as a cautionary tale, an ambitious misfire weighed down by convoluted mythology, too many characters, and no clear central protagonist to anchor the story for the average viewer. It was just too much. God of War, on the other hand, feels way more promising in comparison. The franchise has one clear, compelling main character, Kratos. Unlike Warcraft, where the narrative is split across multiple characters and factions, God of War has a single driving force at its core. Kratos is the face of the franchise. His journey is the narrative. That alone makes it a lot easier to translate into a coherent and emotionally resonant TV series. So, when talk of a possible adaptation started up again, many fans were optimistic, especially if Amazon played it smart and didn't try to reinvent the wheel. If they just stick to the modern Norse saga from the more recent games, they've already got the blueprint for a killer show. The Norse trilogy basically already feels like prestige television, epic in scope, emotional in story, rich with mythology. With just a bit of restructuring, it could easily become a 10-episode season with a strong premiere and a proper budget. Everything's already there. The emotional depth, the father-son relationship, the inner conflict, the ancient gods, the massive set-piece battles. It's tailor-made for the streaming era. And considering Amazon has already shown a willingness to invest in high fantasy worlds, there's a solid chance this could turn out to be a high-quality production. That's not to say there aren't risks. The budget will have to be significant, and expectations for the cast, visuals, and tone will be sky-high. But God of War is also one of Sony's most iconic and successful gaming franchises, so audience interest and marketing muscle definitely won't be an issue. As for the story itself, based on early comments from the producers, the show will mostly focus on the Norse saga. In other words, the Greek era will likely be left out or touched on only briefly through flashbacks. The idea seems to be to dive right into the more mature, emotionally complex version of Kratos that we meet in the last games, rather than rehash his blood-soaked beginnings. And honestly, that might be the smartest move. The showrunner is Ronald D. Moore, a name that carries serious weight in the sci-fi world thanks to his work on Star Trek and the critically acclaimed reboot of Battlestar Galactica. And even though his background leans heavily into sci-fi, Moore has openly admitted that the chance to dive into an entirely different kind of setting is exactly what drew him to the project. In one interview, he made it clear that he's determined to deliver a series that lives up to the source material and satisfies even the most die-hard fans of mythological storytelling. If Amazon and Sony really do decide to center the series around the Norse saga, it would be a logical move at this point. This arc is the most current and relevant in the minds of both fans and mainstream audiences. It's the version of God of War that reshaped the franchise, elevated its reputation, and pulled in a whole new wave of players. It's hard to imagine the studios taking a wild swing at something like the Egyptian or Aztec myths, both of which were floated as potential directions for the games at one point. It's way more likely that we'll either get the familiar Scandi setting seen in the most recent titles, or, at the very least, some flashbacks to the Greek era. but a full-blown adaptation of the original games still feels like a long shot for now. That's exactly how the recent games handled it, and it worked brilliantly. Still, fans remain split. The newer games brought something deeper to the table. Themes of fatherhood, identity, grief, and growth. It gave the franchise a soul. It also introduced more cinematic storytelling, tighter emotional arcs, and a Kratos who had evolved into something more than just a rage machine. That shift resonated with both critics and players, and it's pretty clear that Sony will want to lean into that. So far, official details about the series are still scarce, but according to some reports, Amazon is prepared to invest around $170 million into the first season. That's roughly the same ballpark as the budget for the Rings of Power's debut, and it makes sense. Bringing the God of War to life is going to require a massive amount of visual effects, elaborate set designs, custom-built suits, and of course, intense action sequences. You can't half-step something like this. But the most talked-about element is the casting, especially when it comes to Kratos. And here, Amazon has two clear paths. One option is to go for a recognizable A-list star, a big name that draws attention in headlines. The other road is to cast a lesser-known but perfectly suited actor who fits the tone and soul of the character, similar to what HBO did with Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. In both of those shows, most of the major roles went to classically trained actors, many of them from the UK theater scene, who weren't household names before the show. That approach allowed viewers to fully buy into the characters and the story without the distraction of star power. That's exactly the kind of approach God of War needs. Kratos isn't just a role. He's the emotional core of the entire story. If someone like Dwayne Johnson or Dave Bautista were cast, no matter how talented they are, it would be hard for audiences to see past The Rock playing Kratos instead of just Kratos. That kind of superstar baggage can break immersion, especially in a series that relies so heavily on atmosphere and emotional weight. The ideal actor should be someone with a clean slate, strong screen presence, real dramatic chops, but not a walking brand. The same logic applies to the rest of the cast. If the series is indeed going to focus on the Norse arc, casting for characters like Odin, Baldur, and the other gods has to be absolutely on point. This is where actors familiar to fans of shows like Vikings or The Last Kingdom could shine. Performers who already have that rugged, mythic quality and who look like they belong in that world. Scandinavian actors would be a perfect fit, or at the very least, actors who can carry the gravitas and texture those roles demand. That said, it wouldn't hurt to include a few more recognizable faces to anchor the ensemble. Someone like a member of the Skarsgård family as Odin, for example, could add some prestige and name recognition without overshadowing the rest of the cast. But even then, the focus should never be on the names. It needs to be about mood, myth, and meaningful storytelling. At the end of the day, the series shouldn't just be another high-budget adaptation of a successful video game. It can't just be a flashy blockbuster made for the sake of views. It needs to stand on its own as a story with tight writing, strong character arcs, and genuine respect for the source material. It should dig deep into the mythology, offer new perspectives on familiar characters, and build an emotional connection with viewers, even those who've never picked up a controller. That's the challenge and also the opportunity. Done right, God of War could be the next big genre-defining show, not just for gamers, but for anyone who craves epic, character-driven storytelling. Still, as hyped as this project is, the series definitely comes with its fair share of red flags, or, at the very least, one big question hanging over the whole thing. The biggest issue right now is how long the series has been stuck in development limbo. It's been floating around since at least 2020, and while there have been plenty of rumors and early announcements, actual forward momentum? Practically none. Amazon and Sony have been dragging their feet, and behind the scenes, it feels like a revolving door. Showrunners get swapped out, new writers come in, creative teams shift, and the result is that 5 years later, we still don't have a teaser, a casting announcement, or even a locked-in confirmation about which part of the God of War story is getting adapted. And that's not just frustrating. That's a real concern. Right now, nobody outside the studio seems to know what's actually going on. One industry insider says the story will focus on the Norse era. Another insists it's going to include flashbacks to Greece. One week, the vibe is that production is quietly ramping up. The next week, we're back to radio silence. It has all the hallmarks of what fans dread most: development hell. There's no public word that a final script is locked, no signs of location scouting, and zero evidence that casting has even begun. And then there's Cory Barlog. His involvement has been a roller coaster. One moment, he's hyping the series, saying he's involved and excited. Then suddenly, he's distancing himself, saying the project is entirely in Amazon's hands, and he's just watching from afar. Then, not long after, he's back again, saying he's talking with the new team and things are looking promising. So is he involved or not? Will he have a serious creative role? Or is this going to be one of those producer titles that's more symbolic than anything, like Stephen King's name slapped onto an adaptation he had no real input on? It's honestly hard to say, but there are whispers that Amazon is aiming for a 2026 release window. If that's true, then production needs to start soon. If they're serious about a late 2026 premiere, then the cameras need to start rolling before the end of 2025. Despite all the chaos behind the scenes, the potential here is enormous. The fan base is global and fiercely loyal. The story has real emotional depth, and the mythological setting gives the creators a massive sandbox for world building. If Amazon plays this right, they could have a next Game of Thrones-level fantasy hit on their hands. There's even been some buzz from fans dreaming about someone like Zack Snyder taking the reins. Snyder himself has expressed interest in God of War before, though that was probably more about promoting Twilight of the Gods. But still, the fact that names like his are even being tossed around shows just how much attention this series is getting and how high the expectations already are. Sony clearly has long-term ambitions for a full-blown PlayStation cinematic universe. We've already seen the first bricks being laid with Uncharted, Gran Turismo, and The Last of Us, and God of War is the next logical step. Sony's also working on a live-action Horizon series, plus more in the pipeline, possibly even a new animated Ratchet and Clank project. It's obvious they're not treating God of War as just another title on the shelf. It's a cornerstone IP, one of their biggest and most critically acclaimed. And while the rollout has been frustratingly slow, all signs still point toward this show eventually seeing the light of day. When it does, the pressure will be sky high. But if the creative team can stick the landing, this could be the definitive video game adaptation, something that finally breaks the curse, lives up to the hype, and turns Kratos into a household name far beyond the gaming world.